and welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. My name is Caridad Svich. I was going to say I forgot what my name is today, which I haven't forgotten. My name is Caridad Svich. I'm a playwright, and I'm also artistic director of new works at the Lucille Lortel Theater. And the Alcove is the program devoted to new play development. The conversation series focuses on the art of playwriting and theater making, craft, and a little bit about the world itself, not necessarily all in that order, because it's all combined. I'll start with a brief audio description of myself before I introduce our guest today. So I am a fair-skinned person with, today, my hair changes colors. My hair today is sort of brownish auburnish, much more on the auburn side than usual. I have it up in a ponytail, but I've got bangs, so the bangs are on my forehead. And then I have roundish tortoiseshell rimmed glasses that are perched on the tip of my nose. I have brown eyes, and I'm wearing red lipstick. And I'm wearing one of my favorite shirts. I love this shirt so much. It is a black background. It's got tons of little flowers on it. Because it's sort of like springy, summery time. So I've got pastel colors, pinks, blues, yellows. Behind me is a bookshelf that I wish I had. Which is a bookshelf, a virtual bookshelf full of very imposing books, leather bound, very classic books, all framed behind me. But to distract from what our renovations are happening behind me. Beyond that, our guest today is Zac Kline. Zac Kline is a wonderful playwright, screenwriter, producer, librettist, many hats, director. Oh my gosh, so many things that Zac does. Their work has been seen in many places: Finborough Theater, Royal Stratford East, the Vaults, Prospect Theater, Philadelphia Theater Company, the Newbrook Group, in association with Urban Arts Partnership. Their films have been screened across the United States. They're working on a project for us at the Lortel, which is a commissioned project, a play called Chalk, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And also Fasab, a longtime collaborator of mine. So I'm sure that will come into our conversation at some point on many projects. Both as a dramaturg, as a director, as a curator, all those things. So welcome, Zac, to Conversations from the Alcove.
Thank you, Caridad. Thank you for having me. I love that shirt as well. I'm sure I've seen it before.
You've seen it before, yes. I love it too. Yeah, I bring it out every spring. It's out.
It's like, absolutely, yeah. Happy it's springtime again, or something like springtime again. So.
Yeah, and I wanted to start. I do, as you guys who follow the series know, I start each episode for the artist with the same question, which is, how is the climate crisis affecting your art practice?
Yeah, I mean, first I want to say thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and a real privilege to be part of the Alcove with all these wonderful playwrights. I'm so happy for your home at the Lortel. We go way back, probably close to 20 years now.
Yeah.
So you're such a wonderful colleague and collaborator and all that stuff. So this is a great way to spend an hour. But how does climate crisis affect my practice? I have been thinking about this in conjunction with this play and in general. And I think, funnily enough, if you had asked me 8 months ago, before this commission that really challenged me to interrogate where I am with my practice, I would have said, not at all. And I would have said not at all because I would have said I'm not the mind to tackle that in my art. I'm not someone who writes quote unquote science plays, which is something that, we could certainly talk about. I'm not someone who's an environmentalist. I'm not an analyst. I'm not a politician. All these things, and there's good question as to why we as artists say we're not. And I wrote a play last spring, not for the Lortel, called God Gave Names to All the Animals, and I shared it with a wonderful playwright teacher, Kate Tarker, and Kate read it and gave me some notes and said, this play is, among other things, is about climate crisis. And I said, is it? I think it's about all these other themes which are also there. And she said no. And Kate had been thinking a lot about climate and teaching a class on it, and it gave me pause to think, well, of course, this is the biggest, among the biggest, if not the biggest, real world issue, crisis facing us today. So I think it affects my practice in that we as theater makers, especially now in this socioeconomic, geopolitical climate, are thinking about resources constantly, about thinking about the resources that it takes to make an art form that is both intentionally ephemeral, but also needs to be sustainable. I think it affects my practice, and I'm thinking about what are the time and the energy of bringing people together in a room. I was in a well-known Manhattan studio the other day that pre 2020 would have been packed hallways, packed loud rooms with people practicing musical theater numbers all around while you're trying to do your quiet table reading. Folks in the theater industry, I think, watching this, we'll start to figure out who I'm talking about. And it was just empty. And how much of that, we were one of 3 rooms being rented, and how much of that is for, X, Y, and Z. But it does get you thinking about which lights are on, and I know that's like a periphery view of this, but yeah, I think it affects my practice, and I'm thinking a lot more about what we use to make something and what it takes to make something.
Yeah, well, yes, means of production, means of doing. What are the ends for it as well? I mean, I think that I wonder if structurally, as somebody sort of crafting a play, if that then sort of affects what choices you make about like what you write, how you write it, what kind of decisions you make about like how many scenes or not scenes, or yeah, something about like the making of the play itself that kind of enters into that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think where we always sort of have a kinship in writing is that we both believe, and I think continue to do this, at least I do, because of the absolute art of imagination of this. It sometimes feels like, at its best, it can still feel like playtime. And of course, anything can be on stage, anything can be anywhere. I won't throw other I won't deal with other thornier questions, but anything can be anything, right? In a play. And I think that's including the this is 70 scenes, and this is in 180 locations, and sort of the tried and true of, well, that's where the collaborations come in, that's what we'll take to figure it out. I think, however, absolutely, I think with this play, it was a play that I was thinking about beforehand, that this gave me the opportunity to really think deeper about right, how will this play be made in the room? A play is a document to be staged, and how can I build something that I think is intentionally low footprint, intentionally lower. I don't necessarily mean resources as far as wonderful creative folks, maybe intentionally lower resources. And what does that look like? Absolutely, I think comes into the writing. I think where the challenge comes for all of us now is the conversation has been happening for probably since the Greeks, but I feel it's happening more and more, in the last 20 years. It's been happening since I graduated, graduate school in 2009. Who's going to produce this because it's too big, because it's too expensive, because it's too XY, because it's too XY, and because it's too XY, and because it's too XY and Z. The endless call for the popularity of a two-hander, and there's some wonderful two-handers out there. Don't get me wrong; it's a phenomenal form. This play is built for 2 actors, or it's built for more actors. But I think absolutely, I am consciously considering, this play as something that can be built, and as it's a play called Chalk and Erased, night after night. Does that mean, of course not, like any other things you start when you enter into a physical space, an institutional space, there's all the usual trappings that come with that. But yeah, it absolutely is heavily on my mind, and I'm sure we'll continue to influence, plays beyond this as well.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, there's so many things that you're touching on, and I want to tease out some things. So one of the things that you mentioned earlier about resources, and I was thinking about the wonderful novelist and short story writer Garth Greenwell, who has a terrific Substack, and the most recent one, or one of the most recent ones by the time this airs, will is about money. And it's a very interesting, compelling, just him kind of talking about. This is a question he gets asked most often as a writer, with students. For students, he teaches, and he said students are asking, Garth, how do you make a living as a writer? And he's like, oh God, I don't know. I have, and and it's like, oh well, if I told you all the different things I have to do, and he's of a certain stature, right? So I think students sort of look at him and go, oh my God, you've got it made, and like, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh my God, if you only knew like what my life is like. So I think there's sort of this idea of like resources as an artist. How do you like sustain your practice just on a daily basis? And then also like, how do you use those resources, and how do you how should I put it? Where do you place your focus? Where do you
Right.
prioritize those resources? And then the other part of that is something I don't think this is new to anyone, but it happens often, which is in this business called theater. There's a lot of pay to play, right? You sort of you pay, and you get to play. You get to play, and I think that of course that creates a barrier of access to a lot of different people who can't afford to pay to play and all those things. And so I bring that up in conjunction with this question around resilience, resources, environmentalism, and so forth, about like and spaces you describe of like you're suddenly in a rehearsal room and it's empty, like, well, who can afford now to be in those spaces, right? Like there's also that question.
Right.
How much it costs to rent by an hour? Like, there's still situations where you have to rent spaces if you're not at grad school, where the spaces are there for you and you go, it's all mine and it's wonderful. So I think that, so I'm just thinking a lot about like how as artists we can uh, create more opportunities so that we're not fighting for like the same $5 basically,
Right. Yes.
which equates to the one production a year that is really a new play production, etc. This is a very long-winded question, but I wonder if any of this resonates with you in relationship to both the play you're making, but also just in general about how you kind of approach, because I know you're very proactive about your work. So how do you approach sort of being like, I'm going to take the thing into my own hands and make it happen?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think it's funny because I was just having this conversation with some actors the other day when I had a table reading, and I think my personal ethos has been to get in the room with folks. And I will say openly, I am in a very lucky position where I have the ability and the privilege to be able to rent that rehearsal space, for an hour. And I also believe that rehearsal studio should stay open because it's part of the lifeblood of this industry. And it all, to use a dirty word, it all, I don't know if it trickles down, but it certainly all reigns and goes horizontally, in an arts economy. So I think of my activity as far as, I think, yes, in one regard, I think you could say anyone's responsibility as an artist is to sit down at their desk or their coffee shop or wherever in their car, wherever it, dictating on their phone, wherever it may be, and make their art. And that's a private relationship. And I think of it's funny, I think you'll laugh. I think all the time of David Hare in the Dolorosa, which we can talk about. We're not going to talk about the merits of that piece, but saying my home is in the study, not in the studio, and blah blah blah. He performed his own show, but and I loved him. But I think so. Yes, I think there is that, and especially as I consider myself a theater maker. I consider myself a playwright. I consider that the lens that I look through the world is theater. I write poems. I'm working on a novel. They to me are not incredibly disconnected from theater, and they also have different apparati that they get share within the world. But I think as far as thinking about back to the main question, it's about putting those rooms together. It's about, if nothing else, it's making a space, both, like I think some of us, not all of us, I can get self-conscious of, is this just a party? Is this just a party for my play? Maybe, and maybe that wouldn't be a bad thing, but I don't think it is if you're making space for folks who want to be there, trusted collaborators and new collaborators as well for an afternoon. I fully believe as a producer in compensating folks for their time, whether it's an hour or whether it's for 4 weeks, or I don't know who's rehearsing for 4 weeks right now, but whether it's for an hour or for 2.5 weeks. So I think that's as far it is. I mean, I have a long history of, I think, what was called here, and maybe this has changed, maybe I'm dating myself, quote unquote self-producing. That is taking your show that you wrote in grad school, taking the full-length musical that I wrote in grad school, and applying to the New York International Film Fringe Festival. Which, and you're correct, I don't think Fringe exists in the form that it exists when I participated. But right, Fringe has a financial barrier. It has a buy-in, and in turn they provide a space, and you produce all the other ways. The rest, I'm sure most folks who are listening to this probably know this. And I think I'm thinking more about that now, and the ways I think in which that, maybe less in the UK, the ways in other places, the ways that I think was maybe dismissed as not the institution, as here's the institution, and here's the Fringe, and what you really want to do is do your show at Fringe, and then you'll get to the institution. And I don't know, now that I listen, the institutions are important, and they're so many of our great folks work there, have worked there, will continue to work there. But I think it is a really interesting question. I think the other thing is to say, I think I'm thinking more conscientiously about the rooms are easy. I know what the room is. I know what the developmental process is. I do think at the end of the day that is incredibly necessary for any play, for working artists, for all of that. So I'm thinking more about, how do you build the work in a bigger platform? And I think I'm sure we will get to this. The work that we've done together with the gun control plays, with After Orlando, with your play Spark, with your American trilogy, of these sort of bigger projects where all that's required are a group of actors. And not that it's all that required, but what's required is a group of actors, and maybe some music stands, and maybe some not, and maybe the cost of printing the scripts, or maybe not now, because you can look at it on an electronic device. I think that continues to interest me. I think that's a bigger question in this world of what that looks like. But absolutely, I mean, I think if that sorts of, I know that was also long and discursive, but I think those are sort of the ways that I'm thinking about what it means to create work. I think especially with this play, for the Alcove, I'm thinking about maybe this is not a play that is looking at being in one space for a number of performances. Maybe this is a play that is looking at a different model where I send a box of scripts and a packet of chalk to whoever it is that's interested, and they do it and they document. I know there are projects like this that you've been involved with, projects that Katie Mitchell has been involved in that are looking more like this.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that kind of work, and I think I've mentioned it before on this series, but I don't hesitate to mention it ever again, which is that there was a project that was done called Plays at Home, which was done in 2020 with a consortium of theaters in the United States. It was Baltimore Center Stage and Long Wharf and a couple of others, and then other people join on, and they commissioned artists to write short pieces that could be just done at home. People could just download the script, and I love that so much. I love this idea of like the audience actually taking charge over the material, and it could be in your living room, it could be in the backyard, but you would have no authority over that. Do you know what I mean? And so, and I was like, this is brilliant, genius. I love this. And my friend Andy Smith, who works a lot with Tim Crouch, is a wonderful theater maker, has a new book coming out. Well, by the time this airs, the book will have been out, but it's a book called Plays for People. And he's created a collection of plays that are just that are like, you do them anywhere. The people are the actors in the show. And what Andy does is that he facilitates, or takes charge of somebody that becomes the facilitator in that experience. And I just think that sort of democratic process of having the audience sort of become the artists, and I think there's something that happens a lot, and I think especially, and I'll specifically say about U.S. culture, to some degree, being very general right now, but there is I think a not great prejudice, maybe a divide is a better word, sort of divide between you're an artist and you're not, right? Like that somehow people are told, that's not for you, like that's a specialty, right? And so it's created, hierarchies around who gets to be an artist and all those things. If you train and you go to certain schools and blah, 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 other people feel like I don't have that, so I guess I'm not an artist, creates a lot of imposter syndrome stuff. And, but also say that a lot of people feel disenfranchised from their own artistry or their own capacity for creativity. And I think that, one of the exciting things about handing a play over to an audience is to say, no, you can. You can do this.
Right.
This is not. We are all human. We know how to sort of make stuff up. We also know how to play pretend. These are things that are very common to human beings and animals. And so I think that we can all take part in the pretend part of this, and also the game of that. Theater is a game, right? And we're creating game design for people to play in. And so that's something that really, really excites me, and also that it liberates, I think, some of the burdens around these hierarchies, even the hierarchy about the actor being on stage and the audience is on the other side, and oh, the actor must be special. And it's like, no, we're just the same. We're the same. Really, we are. Like, please stop. So I think that it kind of cuts against a lot of that kind of sort of those barriers. There's sort of sometimes invisible barriers that happen in our industry, but also just in general about how an audience that is not a practitioner comes to an event and thinks, I could never do that, or I could never be that. And saying, well, you can, you have it in you. Right. We are all making this together, right? How did Chalk come to be as an idea? Like what sort of spurred you on, or maybe you're too in the middle of it to even.
No. It's I appreciate it because doing this in the middle of writing the play actually forces me to. It's actually always really great because I tend to be an all or nothing, bear it down. I think as you are as well. Bang furiously at my keyboard and don't talk to me. Sort of first draft writer. So I think it's actually nice to breathe and step outside of it. It came to be as so many plays that I have ended up of mine that I've ended up enjoying writing as the Bake Off. For those who may for those who may, once again, right, everybody on this call and this thing knows, but my wonderful teacher, playwright teacher, Paul Vogel. You may correct me if it comes from if it is prior sources, has long assigned, famously now assigned plays with what 3 to 5 prompts, a period of 48 hours to include them all, write as much of the play as you can. I learned about bake-offs through a wonderful class with Annie Baker now a long time ago. And this play was a bake-off for I want to say I always try to do one around my birthday in October. There were a couple elements I think has to take place on the West Coast, professors, the seasons changing, and maybe something else. I have the the document on my slip of paper, and I said, so that, but I did not write it on that birthday. I lived with it for a long time. And then I saw a writer, a prose writer, a novelist, Rowan Husayo Buchanan, posted on social media how the preconception with Virginia Woolf is often to focus on her death and not how much she created, and not how much she created, and how she was trying to personally reframe that. So I said, okay, I have these bake-off elements. I'm really interested in that. I formerly spent a lot of time in Los Angeles. So I wanted to write something in Los Angeles, thinking about that time, thinking about Los Angeles. I started thinking about one of my artist people heroes, Leonard Cohen. I started thinking about Leonard Cohen in Los Angeles, the time he spent on Mount Baldy being a monk. And as you know, these things start to swirl together. And that was where the play began, when the mission came and the invitation was to continue to work through something, or work something new. I wanted to work on this play because I said, oh, this is a play about sustainability and resources, and what does it mean to make something that could be made in a black box, painted with chalkboard, in consultation with designers, but not a set in the way that we think of there being a set. Or this could be something done on a tennis court in a community center, or this could be something done, I don't know, in a classroom, wherever it may be, the resource. And also that then of course to revisit an idea that germination in Los Angeles, in the shadows of the Los Angeles fires. I think the wildfires of last year, I think what became dominant to me in my mind. I think not, you always want to make sure you're not being X, Y, or Z about it, especially when you're writing from something that's happening in the world. Aren't we always writing from something that's happening in the world? But I think that's sort of that's sort of how the play came from. I think about all the time. I think you were there that night when we did the After Orlando project, a collection of what ended up being over 75 plays by an international consortium of writers. In response to the shooting at Pulse nightclub, we did 4 special evenings. The DR2 produced in conjunction with JR Theatricals, and our wonderful colleague and one of our fiercest playwrights, Migdalia Cruz, took part in the talkback, and she, in her inimicable way. So I apologize, Migdalia, if I'm probably not quoting you accurately, said something like, and when Caridad called, I said, I didn't want to do this. This isn't how this is made. Art takes time. This is going to be crass and this is going to be ugly. However, the call to need to respond, and I think unfortunately I don't think we're in a better place than we were back then. I think we might have thought we were going to be, but I think so in the same way. I'm not a native Californian. I was a visitor. I know folks affected by the fires, but not in a, not in my life in a certain way. But I think feel I spent time in Altadena. I did. So I think there's something in all of that where I was like, okay, that's where I'm going to enter this. That's where I'm going to enter this play from. And like all plays, you don't know what it's going to be 5 drafts from now. But I think sort of that's where it is. That's where it is now.
Yeah, super cool, super interesting. I 3 plays ago, mine. It's hard to count.
It's hard to
Is that
tell.
right?
Yeah.
So I write so many, but
Mhm.
I think I wrote my first California play, which is a really a shocker.
Yeah.
I've lived in California for a long time, and split with New York and other cities, but I never really written about it directly. And I suddenly had this incredible urge a few months ago to write a play set in California, and I was like, why haven't I ever done that before? There was something sort of exciting about, like, I think partly, I think the thing about writing, I mean, obviously it's a big state, and you know you can write about many things, but it's also a very mythologized
Right. Yes.
state, right? Like there's a lot of writing about it, movies, photography. Like it's just it's like writing about Florida. You know what I mean? It's one of those places where people are like, oh, we know what that is. Well, you sort of don't. You sort of know what you've seen about it, right? So, but I thought, hey, I'd like to play in that land. Also because it's the mythologizing around California as a sort of symbol in U.S. culture says a lot about U.S. culture.
Yes.
And so I thought, it's time to kind of look at those waters a little bit, like why some of that, some of those, some of that myth making got created, and why is it still kind of oddly still evocative, or that people kind of hold it in their mind in a certain way. So I'm fascinated. I've become fascinated by California, and also because I think there are many untold stories
Yes.
in California that there's the Hollywood and all of that, but there's also, like, like I said, very rich state, and I think tons and tons of stories, and I think that people don't really have an idea of the breadth and scope of you know of what we don't know about that state, and how incredible it is, and how much it is a key to a lot of things about U.S. culture. To be honest, I was thinking about the Joan Didion.
I was going to say, I was thinking about Joan Didion.
We have to think about Joan Didion when we think about California.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about the wonderful documentary that Griffin Dunn did, which I'm sure you've seen, The Center Does Not Hold. And there's that incredible scene, I was thinking about it the other day, where she talks about, sort of hippiedom and all of that. And she talks about the children. She said, I walked into a bedroom and there was a child and there was like drugs everywhere. And this sort of child was in the room, and that thing of like neglect and abandonment and like, free culture, but also like, oh, whoa, like what's happening to like kids, these kids are sort of left to sort of, they're not being taken care of basically, right? And cared for. And so, and she seemed genuinely in the interview, genuinely shocked and moved. And I was like, oh, that's such a beautiful thing beautiful, perceptive, obviously, thing to remark upon, but also there was this genuine anger behind that of like, why are the children being neglected? In other words, in these cultures the culture of a certain kind of, free love and all that stuff that she was writing about. There was also kind of the dark side of that, right? Of like who was being neglected, how was abandonment, sort of cycles of abandonment being enacted, and so forth. So it made me think about so that's a part of California that sometimes people talk about as well, of like, it's hippie land. It was at one point hippie land and all of that, and Haight-Ashbury and so forth, in its history. I wanted to sort of circle back something about David Hare.
Sure.
I have to talk about David Hare for a second. So, all this to say is that, I know he sometimes gets a, cheeky, response from people. But what I will say, what I really admire about him, again, interestingly, thinking about the Didion, because he's featured in this documentary,
Right,
Griffin
right.
Dunn's, talking about Year of Magical Thinking and the stage version of it. And it makes me think about someone who has a long life in the theater.
Right.
He's actually, he's quite elderly and he still cares about theater. He still writes plays, which, he doesn't have to.
No.
To be honest, I mean, he could stop right now if he wanted to and just make movies for the rest of his life if he wanted to. So there's something to me about like longevity and also thinking about body of work. And I wonder, and how, of course, your work changes over time. So, I wonder if this is something that's attractive to you. I know you work in so many different mediums, so I wonder if you think of it as one body of work that then encompasses all these different things, or if you're like, the plays are one thing, the novel is another, the, libretti is that, so, and where do you situate that in terms of your own aspirations and goals?
Yeah, thank you. So we can talk about David Hare.
Aw, David.
No,
You have to love him. Yeah.
and David, and I think, and I think just I'll answer your question, of course. And I think David Hare does make me think of also, the economic realities of being a playwright
Yeah.
and working in there are wonderful reasons to work in film and television, as they are wonderful genres, and that's a medium. And if the medium is there, of course, why would you not? And then there's the economic realities,
Right.
of course, we don't need to go into. But no, I mean, I think thinking about Horton Foote and thinking about Edward Albee, who I don't know, I think at least apocryphally, I'm sure Edward Albee wrote screenplays, but apocryphally was not in. Virginia Woolf was, of course, adapted, Mike Nichols' film. But right, thinking of those playwrights who did really, and who were in a period where they did not, where they were primarily theater makers to the very end. And it's really interesting to think about who in that class of who in that graduating class is still around. Alan Ayckbourn, I guess, Richard Nelson, although Richard's younger and has done some film as well. But no, I mean, I think
Howard Breton, yeah, Howard Breton, yeah, who's the 80s,
right?
Yeah.
Martin Krim, but
yeah,
some other folks, but Carol Churchill, of course.
Carol Churchill, of course, yes.
Doesn't have to do anything Carol Churchill doesn't want to do, which is great. I think for a long time I stood on the ground or planted in my chair and said, I'm playwright. I write plays, and that's what I do. And then for a brief period, I of 2 years in graduate school, and a little while after, I said I write musicals. I write book and lyric for musicals, and that is what I do. And I think I thought of each project, but I was sort of who I was as a writer, and I wasn't necessarily thinking too hard about the stories I wrote, other than that there were stories the stories that I wanted to write, or if they were collaborative, that I was sometimes the generative force in that, which I think has its pros and has its cons when one person comes with the book and says, this is the book, and everyone says, oh, okay, well, it's the book, but also can you write it a different way? But anyway, that's a different thing. But I think and maybe that's youth. And then I think there was a journey probably around when I met you in a class where I became attuned to new British writing, and I think I remember the day that probably changed my life, and at primary stages, and I said, oh, I'm kind of like doing a Carol Churchill thing, and you said, well, if you're doing a Carol Churchill thing, you really want to read Martin Krim.
Yes.
forever changed. But I think that opened me to, I think, and this would be a longer PhD thesis when you look at some of these artists, but that opened me up to this idea that you see in Churchill's work, that you see in our mutual pal, Simon Stevens talks about it with the paintings of Gerhard Richter, German,
Right.
that every painting is different. And I think that became sort of my focus of, okay, I have my stories, I have my themes, I have my things that I'm working through, but each time I'm going to look at a little different. So I can look at the different plays that I wrote from that period and more consciously doing it. And then I think as I slowly, I will tell the abbreviated version. I through the wonderful Fine Arts Work Center, in Provincetown, I took an online poetry class with our now, I think she's still the poet laureate, Italy Mo. And I said, "Oh, I'm not a poet. I haven't written a poem since high school. I'm not a poet." And cut to 25 poetry, workshops later. It's like, okay, I'm a poet. Oh, I'm not writing. I think this is a novel. It's not a novel. I said, okay, no, well, I'm writing a novel. This is at the point of no return. But I think to your question, I think they're different. I think they are different brains, same mind. I think if that makes sense, in the sense that if I look at them all, I think it is sometimes when I sit down to it, I don't know if he still does them. I saw John Bryan used to do shows at Largo, back to Los Angeles, on Friday nights, where he's such a savant that folks would shout out a song and then shout out something different. So he would do these incredible mashups that he had in his head that someone would say, whatever, so happy together, but in the style of Bob Dylan, or whatever, Alone Again Naturally, but in the style of Les Paul. And you would sort of see him thinking through, no, I can't do that one, too many chords, I can do this one. And he would stop and he would go to his guitar rack and say, you gotta find the right tool, for the job. So I think that's a little bit of that. And I think I'm becoming, maybe it's, I don't know what it is. I was gonna say maybe it's age, maybe it's not. I think I'm becoming more graceful with myself in the, like, yeah, I'm working through this theme, because it's like a big, it's like psychotherapy. There's something still here that I'm working through, but it's a question of, can I come at it in a way that really not even, I was going to say that fits this form. I think we're both less interested in form. Is it a poem? Is it a play? Is it a novel? I think that probably makes a difference between, are you looking for it to be in a poetry journal? Are you looking it to be in a bookshelf and consumed in a traditional novelist way? Are you looking it to be in a space that we call a theater? That's a decision, because we all have to decide if we're gonna, in the same way that I'm, actively trying to shop at Target, not trying to actually shop at Target. I'm trying to actually shop at Costco and not shop at Target, for current reasons, that I'm choosing to drive an electric vehicle and not a gas car. All those, whatever. I want to have ham for breakfast and not bacon.
Right.
But I think for me that becomes, I think there's a two, like all these things, it's a 2 or 3 or 10 step process of, for this play, I was rewatching The Future, the terrific, Miranda July film, and from that, I don't know if her book came first or if it was in the film first. It doesn't particularly matter, but the phrase, "it chooses you," and I think, I know some folks will try something in a bunch of different forms, and if it doesn't work, and it'll find a home. I think that's less interested for me. I think I generally know what something is for the most part. And then of course it always bleeds. It would not surprise you that there are in the 3 sections of my novel, there is a play in each of them. I think the way that I use language, always writing dialogue, it's funny because I'm sure you hear this too. Oh, this is like poetry. Well, it's language on a page and it's scored. In this case, it's scored for an actor. Poetry is also meant to be read. I took attended 2 online lectures with Robert Binsky, who just finished his long tenure running the MFA program at BU and at Boston University. And, he is a poet who says the way it sounds heck of a lot more important than the way it looks on the page and what it says on the page. I don't know if I agree as a poet. Actually, I'm actually not. I'm a poet who's less interested in that, but I'm a theater maker who's interested in that. So I think it's that, and I think ambition is, I have a complicated relationship with ambition. My partner and I are both theater folks, and we talk about this a lot. I think I'm privileged. I'm in a lucky enough position that the ambition for me is to make good work, to find the folks who want to be in those rooms. Robert Ike and Lindsay Turner led a terrific class, a very, very generous class, Zoom sponsored by ATG for over a year during the pandemic for 2 hours every Tuesday. And it was a great community to be part of. And they both were adamant that there is no roadmap. We're not going to sit here and tell you that there's a roadmap because it happens differently for everyone, which of course is incredibly frustrating when we want roadmaps. We want order. Of course, I am both like everybody else. I look at those diminishing spots, at those diminishing theaters who, thank God, are still doing it, and say, "Oh, how can I get my play there?" Because of course, because we live in a structure, and those are sometimes where it feels rewarding to have people in the room. But I think if you can be a realist, of course, because have to look at oncoming traffic when you're yielding, but also to write, to just be able to, for me at least right now, to be able to say I'm gonna make what I hopefully care about the most. Someone asked me the other day, I said, "Oh, well, I don't," they said, "Is this play done?" I said, of course not. It needs, not this play, another play. I said, of course not. It needs 100 more rewrites, but I don't know if it's my most personal project right now. Of course it's personal because I have spent time and care doing it, and I'm lucky enough to have the time to do that. But yeah, I think where I'm excited to get to sit down and make it alone, knowing with theater that, and in the other forms, but knowing with theater that that the ambition is to be in a room and to see where that room leads. I think where I'm heartened is seeing new work by young people, and I don't mean young people like you and me. I mean young people like who just graduated from college, and to see them, because I think they're doing they're doing it. They're getting the rooms together. They're getting the stuff on its feet. But I think we all know a lot more now than we did then, and I think seeing that, like, to know the realities of the hard work that it takes to make art, and to make the art that you want to make, and then to do it, because as you said, it's fun and it's rewarding, and I worked with we were worked with the director who said, the people who are here tonight are the people who want to be here. And I think that's important too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Who wants to be in the room? And, I think sometimes our industry is chasing people around going, well, can we get those people here? And I'm like, well, I mean, that's a good thing to ask.
Yeah.
Like, why aren't people coming? And what barriers are you perhaps creating inadvertently or advertently that are making people say that's not for me? But I also think, but also it's like, don't dismiss the people that do show up.
Right.
Because, they matter. And yeah, I think about that a lot in terms of how sometimes people talk about subscribers in subscription-based theaters, because I'm like, well, actually, they do show up, like, like, you know what I mean? Like they actually care, like, so, and I think the question then becomes, how do you, to put it mildly, how do you sort of bring your subscribers along to learn and grow as the theater form is learning and growing? I think about like the world of music or the world of visual art that doesn't treat its patrons like trash, right? Like it sort of says, I mean, that's a very crude way of saying it, but I think that, but you know what I mean? Like it's sort of like the patrons, hi, visual art. This is visual art. Look, there are new artists coming up. They're doing this. And the patrons will either be into it or not, but they understand that new things are happening, and that they're part of that conversation. I think sometimes theater is not very good at that. I think sometimes the industry is like, well, let me give you what you know already. And I've sat in a lot of rooms with a lot of theater people and a lot of subscriber people, and some of them are bored. They're like, why do I always see the same thing? Like, they're not. I think there's this funny, odd way of pejorative, right? This pejorative thing of like subscribers are they only interested in one thing or like whatever. I'm sure you've heard all those conversations, and I'm like, but actually, a lot of them are looking for new stuff. They're actually interested to see what else could I see today. They've also seen a lot of stuff. Do you know what I mean? I just remember being in an audience once, and the person next to me was like, "Oh, I've seen 20 plays like this."
Right.
I mean, literally, that's what they said. And I'm like, right. They actually have. So they don't want to see another one like that.
Well, yeah, well, and it's funny because I think the commerce of it and the commerce of popular music and the commerce of the American theater can't, in many ways can't be premiered because the economics of it work differently. However, right, I keep thinking, I mean, you're right. I think you're yes, I've heard all those conversations. I'm thinking about, 3 points. It's, the theater that said to me, we love your play. Our audience won't go with it. We could maybe do this play in 5 years. I said, okay. Like, they listen, these folks came to the reading. Granted, it was small. Granted, these are, great folks. Like, so like, sure, I don't know what to make of that conversation. That's a decision you're making. And yes, at the end of the day, absolutely. You have to lead with what does it. But I'm thinking about we're currently at the Jersey Shore. I'm thinking about this little music room right off the island that is packed all the time. And I understand their overhead is low. They're getting both rising and falling folk singers, so I understand they find an audience. I understand, but it's a smaller community, all that stuff. But there is such a reward for it. And they're also passing the hat, like in addition to paying for a ticket because they have to because they're a nonprofit. And I'm thinking a little bit, I mean, I just went to the Sphere in Las Vegas, and that is a different conversation about impact on about technology and impact. And it is amazing. And right, it's a show where, once again, different economics, but there is some kernel of truth if it can be extracted of, right, here is this thing that people love, the Grateful Dead, and here is a new way to re-envision it. And yes, of course, it's I can only imagine the price tag on it, and the Grateful Dead is not a small institutional theater, but right, there is something true there of how can we think about this. I think there can be an impetus to either this is what we do and we have to do it, and this is how the bread is made, and this is how we cut the loaf, and it works, and it's safe, and we're going to do it until something changes, or we have to reinvent it and we have to reinvigorate the form. I'm sure you've had those conversations as well. And it's kind of like, well, no, isn't it in between? People, I say all the time, I probably shouldn't. I'm just like, theater's too. I'm just like, well, what's going to happen with theater? I say, oh, theater's too dumb to die. What do you mean? I said, well, I think it is what it is. I think there's always going to be a place for it, because yes, of course, there are people like us who care deeply about it, but also I think sometimes some of that entrenchment is both what makes it perilous, but also it's like, right, let's no one's saying, well, yes, obviously there are all sorts of reasons to reinvent things, to think about things different structurally, but right, I think it's that question of the burst of cold water. It's that question of what you're talking about the forms. It's funny with this play, I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do what I haven't done in a while, which is I'm going to write a three unities play, right? Unity of time, unity of character, unity of action, and then I said, well, wow, that's really counterintuitive to a play that's meant to sort of be live drawn with chalk, and wouldn't that make more sense that you're in this location, that location? I said, well, I'm going to go with it. I'm going to see how they either contrast or aid each other. And then I thought about it and I said, oh, that's so funny. That's like all these plays that we now are immediately, that's I don't want to see another living room drama. And I was like, wait a minute, that's what living room dramas are. They're all in one place with one characters. I mean, not all of them, but with one day. It just made me think about. It made me think about a lot about that, and how I think about the Apple Family plays a lot, and the other, and the Gabriels and Richard Nelsons, of work of plays that I don't know, be a longer curious interview to do one day about how that work aligns with climate and sustainability, or if it's just that, never just that it's Chekhov, right, at its core, and he's interested in telling stories and being in the room with people. And then Chekhov, our first environmental playwright, right? I mean, maybe other folks too, but so I think I think about the contrast of certain plays which we've both seen, where you're like, but they don't need wainscoting, they don't need crown molding. We know it's a living room, and I understand. I'm all for the liberty. I shouldn't say liberty. I'm all for the artistic freedom of. There are real limitations, I think, of the imagination to putting two chairs on an empty stage and saying, well, that's a living room. I think that can also end up being very limiting. But I do think it's a question of where we've said, been there, done that, seen these people in a room. How are we going to upend it? And then the question of also, right, I mean, and then there, I just think it's an interesting thing, especially, I don't think we've moved entirely out maybe we have a little now entirely out of neorealism as sort of what was seeming like the dominant form in the American theater. But I think, now is an interesting time as we see those plays as well, and what happens next.
What happens next? Indeed. Well, we're almost literally a minute off from
Yes.
our hour mark. It's amazing. And what a wonderful conversation. And thanks for making time today, Zach. So much fun. So we could talk for hours, I know. And but we tip of the iceberg,
Yes.
and hopefully, if you're out there in the universe, watching this or listening to this, however you engage with the series, seek out Zach's writing, which is very beautiful. If you followed the series before, I say so long first to you all out there before I do another so long off camera and offline with our guest. But for now, thanks for visiting Conversations from the Alcove. Join us our next episode, and or follow up on our back issues, as it were, our back shows that we have in our series, because there's many, many beautiful things to learn from, I think, to sustain us. I think talking about writing and thinking through writing does something good for the soul, I think. So I'll say that. Anyway, so long and see you soon.
Thank you.